Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. I'm here meeting you again with lecture 30. This is lecture 30 of drama 2, that is modern drama, and it is the second lecture of the continuation of our review lectures based on the entire course. So today we are going to talk about Sean O'Casey and the play that he has written. Sean O'Casey was born in 1818 and died in 1964, so you can well understand the time period in which he would have his boom of writing. The play has been written on the background of Irish Civil War, which has been going for centuries. So another attempt that was particularly written in the background of Irish Civil War and generally war. So you can understand what kind of play that has been. You have gone through it. So today's talk is primarily going to be to review this very particular author and his writing. So we'll be talking about Juno and the Paycock, and we will start with the Jingoism, the concept of Jingoism and the play. Jingoism basically literally means flag waving, an appeal intended to arouse patriotic emotions. However, this is not simply patriotic emotions, this is a lot more than that. And the denotative meaning of this very term has two aspects attached to it. One school of thought describes it as it's an extreme nationalism characterized especially by a belligerent foreign policy, chauvinistic patriotism. However, the other school of thought describes it as extreme or eccentric national loyalty that is hostile to the interest of any other nation. So this patriotism that makes you selfish to the extreme that you stop thinking about humanity in general in comparison with your own country, then it becomes this very movement, the movement of Jingoism. And the presence of this idea is very much existing in this play written by Sean O'Casey, who says that it's an extreme patriotism in the form of aggressive foreign policy, and in practice it is a country's advocacy of the use of threats or actual force against other countries in order to safeguard what it perceives as its national interest. Colloquially, it refers to excessive bias in judging one's own country as superior to others, an extreme type of nationalism. So the term originated in Britain, expressing a penguitious attitude towards Russia in the 1870s and appeared in the American press by 1893. So basically the play involves, although it involves many functions, however there are three elements which you will find overwhelming all of the other functions. The very first is that it talks about the different groups which were involved in the Irish Civil War, and these groups can be divided into three categories. One was the group of free staters who voiced the need of a free state. The second group was of those who demand have ruled Ireland within the authority of English Parliament, and third was the Unionists who want unity with main Ireland. So free staters, the people who would want authority of English Parliament, and the third category who would want union with the main Ireland. So main Ireland got independence after the First World War. This is just little refresher of the background, so you may understand why this civil war, a civil Irish war started. So the main Ireland got independence after the First World War, and Ireland is divided into southern and northern Ireland. Northern Ireland is now called Ulster. The people of main Ireland are Roman Catholic. The majority of Ulster is Anglican, so there is political and religious conflict. And these conflicts are then articulated in this way, either to unite with main Ireland, the third category, or to unite with England, the second category, or to be totally independent was the main problem of Enigma, the very first category, the category of free staters. So these were three voices echoing all over the place in the Irish Civil War that divided country into three very vivid groups of people. So the play that is written in the background of Irish Civil War, that has the idea existing in it is of Jingoism, extreme nationalism, that becomes very biased and selfish as well. It has its social significance because it talks about distortion of all sorts, whether it is of relations, emotions, human existence, their development, or any other kind of distortion that human being can encounter living in a society, was there prevailing in that society, which was kind of victimized, I would say, because of these ideas of division. So the society that Jean O'Casey portrays basically is portraying a chaos of emotions, a kind of distortion in emotional relationship. And he mainly focuses on the relationship between men and women, mother and child, and all the other relations which basically make a bond of a family. So the Paycock or Peacock represents the chaos that Juno endures during the play. Juno is the main character of the play, and she is a female character once again. However, the relevance that the play has with its title is one very interesting aspect you might have understood. In mythology, the name Juno is the Roman name for Hera, the goddess of marriage, and the peacock is her symbol. She would ride Paycock, a carriage of Paycock. The Boyle family is basically the family the play revolves around, and it's a working class family in their attempt to escape their dilemmas of poverty, dilemmas of a life, deprived life, dilemma of situation where they are powerless, hopeless, a dilemma where a woman has been carrying all the burden of her family. And they are alienated from each other. The emotional drawback that is experienced by the family is that each character is isolated and is kind of narrowed down in him or her own self. So let's see, let's have a very quick understanding, rather re-understanding of all of these characters, what kind of characters they are playing in the drama. Juno Boyle, she's a breadwinner, she is realist in the family and showing her strength in adversity. Here, O'Casey is making it very clear that the reality comes in front when the situations are not very favorable. So she's the character who shows and proves her strength, not even in the time of prosperity, but in adversity. Mary Boyle is Juno's daughter. She's most of the time on strike for her principles that she articulates, but she does not really act upon. She's blinded by appearances. So she is one victim who is blinded by the deception of appearances. Jack Boyle is an idle, you can say, is a symbol of idleness, a real cripple in life. Mary is always reading lately, nothing but trash too. That's he thinks about his daughter. I'm hardly able to crawl with the pains in my legs. You'll all the time find him complaining about one thing or another. However, most of the time you will find him complaining about the pains which normally come up, which normally are visible to the character only when he is told to do some kind of work and take responsibility of his family. Jack Boyle is a kind of representation of the idea of Jingoism that I talked in the beginning of the talk. He is a self-deceptive man. He talks with a commanding and complacent gesture, and he says that stressors don't care a damn now about their parents. They are bringing their father's gray hair down with sorrow to the grave and laughing at it, laughing at it. That's he speaks. Captain's able to take care of himself. And these are the ideas by Jack Boyle that may enable you to understand his character very well. Johnny Boyle, suffering from his betrayal to his comrade, showing no sympathy to his sister. Johnny Boyle is son of the family, Boyle's family, and he has, again, you would say spark for the patriotism. However, he's not able to do justice with the idea and gets into Jingoism, as well as you would say he begets some negative attitudes toward relationships where he experiences betraying his comrades, and then he shows no sympathy to his sister as well. We find Jerry Devine. He's a person who would judge love from material things. So a controversy between the reality of life and the significance of materialism in life. He turns his back on Mary when knowing she's having Bantham's baby. Charlie Bantham brings fantasy and delusion to the Boyle family. Joxer Daly is a parasite, is a friend to Mr. Boyle, and he again is a crawler. So the relationships that we would see is basically start with the very idea of motherhood. So the mothers in Juno and the Paycock are the mother that Shaughnessy would perceive as ideal mothers, because he has a very strong bond with his own mother. So while facing the death of their sons, Mrs. Tancred, despairing and anticipates her own death. She says, "Oh, blessed Virgin, where were you when me darling son was riddling with bullets?" And Juno Boyle, hardy and resolute, "Ah, what can God do against the stupidity of men?" has a strong belief that whatsoever good happens, it happens because God is so loving, and whatever bad happens in one's life, it happens because man is victim of his own stupidities. Okay, so let's have a plot overview, a very quick overview of the drama. We find that this drama revolves around Boyle's family, and Boyle is a useless and irresponsible drunkard who shuns the reality of work at every stage in the play and spends his time in the pub drinking with his friend Joxer Daly. The Boyles have two children, Johnny and Mary. Johnny is a sickly individual who has been involved in the Republican movement, but he ended up betraying a comrade by the name of Tancred. Johnny spends his days locked up in the house, fearful of his life and death. His mother Juno is a selfless character who is concerned all the time about other people and primarily of her own family. Now, Juno's daughter Mary is deeply concerned about appearances. She is a shallow character who seems to judge people and things from the outside. When we meet her at the beginning of the play, we learn she is on strike because of the dismissal of a young girl called Jenny Cleffery. Yet we are told from Juno how Mary never had a good word to say about Jenny Cleffery in her whole life. So a conflict between words and actions. So the family is told, the family is very poor and suffering because of the problems associated with poverty and powerlessness. The family is suddenly told that they will inherit money, a big amount of money, from a distant relative who has died. Bentham is the solicitor who informs them of this fact. And he begins to have relationship with Mary, and she becomes pregnant. And Bentham is being opportunist here to establish illegitimate relationship with the daughter of the family. Bentham shortly after this abandons her, the girl of the family, Mary Boyle. As soon as he gets to know that the will is not being materialized, he abandons Mary Boyle. The Boyles begin to borrow money and accumulate a great deal of debts. And from here, their adversity starts. However, unfortunately, the legacy never materializes, and the Boyles are forced to return the borrowed goods. Johnny is dragged off to be shot for the betrayal of Tancred. Juno finally realizes that Boyle will never take on his responsibilities as father and breadwinner, and so she leaves him and sets up home with Mary. So, what is the general vision or viewpoint of the writer that he's presenting in this drama? The general vision is grim and somber. There is a subtle sense throughout the play that war is futile and only contributes to harsh quality of life, distortions, chaos, and disturbance. Many of the characters represented in the play are tragic victims of war and of poverty, or we can say war, hence of poverty. The overall general vision seems to highlight the heroic quality of the women and their enormous capacity to suffer and then be calm and collected. What cultural context is associated with the background of Irish Civil War? The particular cultural context of this play is war-torn Dublin in the years 1922 and 23 during the Civil Irish War. The play is set in the slums or tenement part of the city. It is deeply rooted in poverty and the degradation consequent on war. Illegitimacy is seen to be something which brings with it disgrace, and the woman is left humiliated. The play also deals with working class Dublin and how certain people avoid working and struggling and working hard and spend their time drinking in pubs and wasting it. So you will find that the play has reflection of social and personal influences as well as cultural influences. We see war as a social influence, we see mythological association as cultural influence, and we see feminism, the approach, as the personal influence in Sean O'Casey's writing. We have already discussed about war, how war has its influence on this play, and it's very much overwhelming throughout in every aspect of the drama, no matter whether it's characterization or plot or overall ambience or setting. In fact, in 1916, there was a great uprising and many people were killed. O'Casey felt very sorry for them, and he was basically a pacifist, a person who would speak for peace, and he looks for independence, but not at all at the cost of peace and lives. This approach is also like that of W.B. Yeats and all of the other writers that we read in modern drama who feel sorry for human casualties. To both W.B. Yeats, Sean O'Casey, and Sean O'Casey, war is an evil fought under any pretext, no matter what is the pretext, what are the intentions. War, the activity of war, is an evil activity. There is no excuse for it. Reality is more important than ideology. Man is more important than patriotism and religious fanaticism. O'Casey is down to earth, a realist in fact. He is similar to Shaw and is strongly anti-war writer. He is an anti-war, anti-class, anti-patriotism, anti-fanaticism, anti-trade unionism, anti-dogmatism, anti-ideology, and anti-false aristocracy person as well as writer. we understand that Sean O'Casey is a feminist writer. So the play predominantly conveys women's struggle, hard work, capacity to suffer, the endurance and courage even in times of adversity. O'Casey has taken the character of Juno and the Paycock from Greek mythology because of one very important aspect of European literature, that is their interest, their deep interest in classical mythology. O'Neill wrote Electra, Shaw wrote Pygmalion that you read. Yeats wrote about Byzantium. Ibsen has created his own myth of wild duck influenced by Greek mythology, and following the trend, the writer has created his own myth inspired of one Greek mythology, Juno and the Paycock. So the European writers always wanted to write on contemporary themes. That is the wave of modern writing. They want to write on mundane level, but now modern themes are trivial. As in the play, though the domestic problems do not have heroic dimensions, therefore modern writer refers to classical myths to give a color of sublimity to their subjects, so to evoke their interest. So the other reason is that due to contemporary chaos, communications have become difficult because there is no share of feelings, and everybody would like to keep his or her feelings to, not to share it with people. So therefore modern writers seek for some kind of focal point which would be equally meaningful to various people or different categories of people. So when we talk with reference to the myths of Oedipus, Hamlet, Pygmalion, Byzantium, Electra, so on and so forth, the communication becomes easy, and it is easy to interact with different categories of people. And that is what thought by Sean O'Casey and many of the writers of the same kind who used mythological references in their writings in modern drama. So in a disintegrated society, myth provides a focus and a central figure, kind of a center of attention. Some writers create their own myths, as in the later Romantic period and in early modern period, as Shelley creates the myth of West Wind, Keats creates the myth of Hyperion and Psyche, Ibsen makes the myth of Wild Duck, and then O'Casey also uses Greek mythology in the play Juno and the Paycock with his own interpretation. So this was all about the context, the social, personal and cultural influences attached with Sean O'Casey's writing. Now let's have a quick overview of the major themes and issues discussed in the play, which involve realism and fantasy, poverty and religion. The theme of poverty dominates the play at every level. The whole play in fact highlights the cruel irony that while many people were fighting for ideals and principles, there were others who were suffering from the debilitating effects of the poverty. Because of the negative effects generated by poverty, escapism assumes a major and dramatic element in the lives of characters. Mary's tragic situation occurs because of poverty, and she likes to take shelter into the idea of being attached, being in love with a rich boy who can bring her fortune and a lavish lifestyle. When it becomes clear that the Boyles will not inherit any legacy, Bentham disappears forever, abandoning Mary alone to have her baby. However, we find that the people like Bentham are opportunists, and they reveal their real selves in the time of adversity. As far as theme of poverty is concerned, Jerry Devine standards of what are essential features in a husband are set out in terms of money, materialism. At one stage, he tells Mary how the job is worth. Juno, who is the only character rooted in the harsh, practical, everyday world of necessity, realizes that money, hard work, and responsible social commitment are stronger and more realistic values in this world than principles and false idealism. Her Mary's stance on how principles won't pay butchers is in striking contrast to the incessant evasion from reality inherent in all of the other characters. And the theme of religion is also a dominant feature in the play. The play is set against a strong Catholic background. Ocasek makes frequent use of images of Our Lady and the votive light to project an air of realism and authenticity in the play. There are also a variety of different religions and attitudes expressed throughout the play. One of Ocasek's chief mottos in the play seems to show the coexistence of strong religious convictions, together with a sincere and human commitment to one's fellow men. So, Juno's faith is sincere, authentic, and traditional. She believes on Johnny's death that God can do nothing against the stupidity of men, that her husband should be praying novens for a job, and that what Ireland needs is more piety. On the other hand, Bentham espouses a religion by the name of Theosophy. This is projected as vague and abstract and certainly seems to be compatible with his own shallow commitment to people and religious beliefs. The play dramatizes the conflict, a very strong conflict, between the dream world and the world of reality, and shows what happens when a character is stripped of his illusions and forced to face reality. Boyle, the male member of the family, or apparently the Paycock symbol, struts throughout the world of the play on a false and imaginary sense of his own self-importance. His whole life and career consist in fabricating dreams of his gallant years as a captain fighting heroic feats and sailing the ocean of the world exploring fortune. The news of the legacy provides another outlet to Boyle's habitual evasion of reality. He sees himself as a potential investor on the stock exchange. The theme of the fantasy and reality. His whole life, Boyle's whole life, is a lie. His pains, which are invented for the sake of shrinking and avoiding work, become real to him. He refuses to face up to the truth and reality about Bentham, and the deception surrounding the news of the will is basically another evidence of his likeness for idealism and fantasies in life. When reality invades at the conclusion of the play in the form of Mary's illegitimate relationship and its evidence, and the actual removal of his material possessions, Boyle is unable to cope up with these facts of life. His final entrance, dramatized in a drunken, fragmentary soliloquy, is very tragic. His habitual escape into fantasy is pathetically expressed through his drunken pose. Mary, who represents the younger generation, also falls victim to illusion. On her first appearance in the play, she is shown to be on strike for a principle. The oppressive and stifling atmosphere generated by the tenement life forces her to seek escape through Bentham. For her, he represents another way of life and values outside the restricting and debilitating atmosphere within the two-roomed tenement. So what happens that eventually she falls victim to the subtle deception of Bentham's middle-class gentility. She's blinded by external appearances and ends up as a victim, as a tragic victim of Bentham's hypocrisy and selfishness. At the conclusion of the play, she is forced to return to the reality of the slum life, with Juno, in spite of all her attempts to escape through learning and books. And we find that Juno and the Paycock is a tragi-comedy. Now, tragedy-comedy, to refresh your memories, is a kind of writing in which comedy is hovering on the brinks of tragedy, and comedy is used in order to enhance tragedy. Okay, since Juno and the Paycock is a tragi-comedy, although on the whole it is a serious and somber play having much destruction and violence. But there are a number of comic elements in the play which would not fit into the pattern of a tragedy. On the other hand, as the comic elements do not outweigh the tragic ones, it would be inappropriate to label the play as a comedy. So it means that there is a coexistence in the play of tragic and comic elements, and so the best course is to treat it as a tragi-comedy. The play starts with a graphic description of Boyle's household. The setting reflects the poverty of the dwellers. Then the news of murder of Robbie Tancred is also very gloomy. Johnny's neurotic condition adds to the tension of the play, but suddenly the mood of the play changes when Captain Boyle and Johnny Daly come in. So basically you will find that play is a combination of serious and lighter moods all the time, and they all the time substitute each other. However, this play and the very character of Mr. Boyle is understood as grotesques. And there is this element of fun is existing in not only in articulation and appearances but also in movement. The description of Mr. Boyle in Jocks' physiognomy creates laughter. They are in fact grotesques. Mr. Boyle's neck is short and his head looks like a stone ball on top of a gauge spot. He carries himself with the upper part of his body slightly thrust forward. His walk is a slow, consequential thrust. Actually, on the whole, farce is in the play. It is in verbal as well as in all other mediums possible. It is verbal because it is again and again repeated. The comic through comic catchphrases, the cumulative comedy of repetition. There is the comedy of dialect and mispronunciation as well. There is comedy of pompous phrases misused, of ludicrous images. Inflations and deflations both are comic. Captain Boyle's inflation of his fantasies with invention, exaggeration, rhetoric, and bombastic, and Juno's faculty in knocking him down, etc. All are very comic and entertaining. Despite so much laughter and comedy, the play is predominantly tragic in theme. For example, the ignorance that promotes Jocks' and Captain Boyle's mistake makes us laugh at first, but is fundamentally tragic. Their idleness, drunkenness, and devaciousness give numerous opportunities for comedy, but are in themselves wasteful and destructive. So the tenement life gives rise to farcical situations, but is in reality very grim and somber. Thus, the superficialities of certain circumstances of Dublin life make an audience laugh whereas these are tragic if examined in full. For example, heroes become cowards, nationalism becomes jingoism, labor humanitarianism becomes inhumanity. So in short, the pith and marrow of all this discussion is that comedy is here, in fact, hovering on the brinks of tragedy. And so we are apt and just when we call Juno and the Paycock a tragi-comedy. However, we know that Sean O'Casey deals with his play, Juno and the Paycock, with his very much feministic approach. So the play is a feministic play. Like Ibsen and Shaw, Sean O'Casey is also a feminist playwright. His play End of the Beginning, The Shadow of the Gunman, and Juno and the Paycock are all the three extreme examples of feminism. The reason of his feministic approach in O'Casey's great admiration for his mother. He led a very miserable life with his mother in slums, and his mother nursed him in very poor circumstances. In return, he loved her mother very much. Many of his heroines have glimpses of his mother, and they are based on the personality of his mother as well while facing the adversity. So O'Casey advocates that we have to give an equal status to women to progress in the modern world. That is the stance he takes in his feministic approach. The theme that man flatters women, and this theme has to do with his idea of feminism. Like other plays of O'Casey, Juno and the Paycock also projects the theme of feminism, that traditionally man flatters women and exploit them for their own benefit. In this play, Mary and Juno are flattered and dragged down by their circumstances caused by the men. Both worked hard to make both ends meet. While men are irresponsible, careless, coward, and drunkard, they are not at all ready to pick up any responsibility or to do any betterment for the sake of home. Rather, they are becoming the case of degeneracy for the home and are adding fuel to the fire of disturbance. So you will see masculine representation in terms of Mr. Boyle's and Johnny's character, and all two of them are presented as important dreamers, escapist, and scared creatures. Johnny and Mr. Boyle think that one day Ireland must be free and the days of prosperity will come, but women characters now in the worst circumstances caused by war suffers most of all in the time of calamity. They have to see their husband and sons killed and slaughtered and their lovers burned down. When Robbie Tancred is murdered, it is Mrs. Tancred who suffers behind him. The words of Mrs. Tancred's lamentation on the death of her son always hurts Juno, and she already prays for the life of Johnny. Blessed Virgin, Sacred Heart, O Jesus, take away our hearts of stone and give us hearts of flesh. And here the articulator, the character, is referring to the inhumanity she is observing in the world outside. Captain Boyle, the household of Juno, the husband of Juno, is a drunken, careless, irresponsible, and a man of straw, having no consciousness at all. He has never worked in his life, and his only business is to paycock about the clubs and pubs with his friends jocks daily, an equally significant crawler and loser. They together boast of nationalism, but they never bother about their homes. Captain Boyle is a typical aristocratic figure who does not care about his wife and children and is not willing to take any responsibility at all. Whenever Juno instigates him and laments him to do work, at least for his own sake, he always makes lame excuses and complains about pains here and there in his body. The legs with which he can wander around the day, he says that he cannot work with his legs. And his words, and I quote, "Would it be a climbing job? How would you expect me to be able to go up a ladder with these legs? And if I get up myself, how am I going to get down again?" So this is what Mr. Boyle would always bring forward as an excuse to his wife's insistence on his work. And progressing our talk about women's grief, Juno has to suffer on different grounds basically. She has a husband who keeps on strutting about from morning till night, whereas she has to carry the burden to her whole family. Her son Johnny has lost an arm and has a hip shattered in the war. The daughter, who has turned rebel and is on strike, ultimately gives birth to a child by a school teacher, her fiancé. Ain't the hell of circumstances, Juno has to bear the sufferings of existence. But unlike Captain Boyle, she does not romanticize her son's exploitation when Johnny drags on a sacrifice for Ireland by saying that he would sacrifice his other arm too because a principle's a principle. Juno speaks bitterly. "Ah, you lost your best principle, my boy, when you lost your arm." So, the feminine representation in the drama, women who are realistic as well as disillusioned. Ocassi very beautifully portrays the high status of women, that women are more realist in their approach to life in general and to war in particular. Here we see, though Juno is an uneducated woman, yet she holds her dignity and shatters the web of idealism attached to war and trade unionism. When Mary emphasizes that a principle's a principle and tries to justify her call on strike, Juno remarks very realistically. When the employers sacrifice one victim, the trade union go one better be sacrificing 100. That is what he feels about unionism. In the country like Ireland, which is poverty-stricken and war-ridden, one cannot afford any kind of idealism. Rather, the poor have to have the practical approach and must work hard in order to survive and break down the barriers of slavery. We see also Juno is conscious of this fact when she asks Mary, what will the Shakespeare say when she says to him, "A principle's a principle." Juno is very conscious of the fact that the miseries of the Irish people are not because of their stars, but they are because of their carelessness, misdeeds, romanticism, and idealism. That's why she asked Mary, "Ah, what can God do against the stupidity of men?" In the play, we see that Mary's suffering are also caused by men. She rejects Jerry Devine because she realizes the fact that Jerry is not a type of man who will stand by her through thick and thin. She realizes Charlie Bentham, but he deceives her and leaves her dissolute and pregnant. Boyle's so-called questions of honor awaken only on this moment, and he frightens Juno of dangerous consequences if Mary does not leave the house. But in all these circumstances, it is only Juno who stands beside her. This shows Ocassi's feminine independence. So all these aspects lead us to conclude that women in Juno and the Paycock are realist and wiser than men. They have the awareness of life which men lack. This assumption of a case is not based on lie or any other idealism. Assumption of a case is not based on lie or any other idealism. In fact, O'Casey wants to stress as well as evoke women to follow their instinctive, feminine, good sense and to play their part in the domain of modern life. So, we see that O'Casey is very much against the war fought under any pretext. He closely observed that how war affects the society and the individuals, how war crushes the economy and the system, how war disintegrates the family structure, and how it demolishes the psychology of the people and how it creates generation gap. So now a word about the issues that O'Casey raised in his writing and the positions he takes. O'Casey condemns social unjust, inequality as well as violence, and all this is definitely presented in the background of Irish Civil War. He condemns the exploitation of man by man. He condemns man's inhuman treatment towards man, and he condemns man's barbarity against man, man's brutality. The play begins with Mary's reading a newspaper. The very first information we get from the play is of a gruesome murder. On a little by road out beyond Fingles, he was found. O'Casey evidently has sympathies for the poverty-stricken and war-ridden Irish society. There is nothing predictable in Ireland. Everyone is in extreme danger. They are hanging between life and death. There are lots of references in the play regarding Ireland's religious and political history. Irish makes many attempts to shake off the foreign yoke. Foreigners are very inhuman to them. In 1916, hundreds of casualties and execution of the leaders are faultless examples of this brutality. But this inhumanity is not just caused by foreigners. O'Casey feels very much sympathetic towards his own people because he finds that the real problem arises when the killing of Irishmen by Irishmen starts. War, or to be more exact, a civil war, has no solution to man's problem. Rather, it aggravates the miseries of victims. The civil war is not confined to two fractions, rather it expands to the whole Ireland. The death of Robbie Tancred and Johnny Boyle are perfect examples of that. So, Johnny, who has lost an arm and has a hip shattered in a fight, is at the end dragged away and shot by his former Republican commanders because he betrayed Comrade Tancred. All this shows that Ireland is preying on herself. Earlier, Johnny had undoubtedly behaved heroically, but the hellish civil war compelled him to betray his comrade. This means that the stupid civil war is turning into traitors because of its nothingness and hollowness and purposelessness. So, Juno emerges as a great humanist and realist. She is a true pacifist and is against man's inhumanity against man. She has an acute observation and knows about the truth of things. She is very realist and anti-idealist. When Mary emphasizes that one ought to stand by one's principle being a principle's a principle, and tries to justify her call of strike, Juno very realistically remarks. And when the employer sacrifice one victim, the trades union go van better be sacrificing 100. So, being a realist, she has a firm belief in the idea that the fault does not lie with the stars, but with the people themselves. And she says, what can God do against the stupidity of men? So, the domestic tragedy, which mainly springs out from pregnancy, is due to the inhumanity of the man again. That male chauvinist society cannot tolerate a mistake by a young girl. Whereas, on the other hand, the idiots like Captain Boyle and Joxer Daly are left unaccountable. Hope for a good time is only due to the courage of women. They are very human and cooperative. O'Casey's criticism of life is conveyed through the repetition of significance of very deep dialogues. The words of Mrs. Tancred's lamentation are poignantly recorded by Juno, who, when she too is mourning over a slain son. Against the vanity and moral bankruptcy of masculine character, O'Casey elevates the mother figure when Juno plans to work for Mary and her unborn child. Juno suffers the pain of existence, but she sustains life, her own and of many others. Now we will see how Nugent wants others to respect Irish people's national regard for the dead, but stitches suits for the civil guards at night. So the appearance versus reality. The opportunist class represented by Nugent has also been condemned. According to O'Casey, this opportunist class is more harmful than even the combatants. They themselves become the cause of civil war and play a double role. Thus we see O'Casey very beautifully depicts man's inhumanity towards women and man's inhumanity towards man. O'Casey is at heart a humanist and a pacifist. He considers life mere inevitable and all idealism is subservient to it. He condemns all principles and gives one and the only principle to live all the days of life peacefully. So, deterioration of a relationship, poverty, religion, and escapism. Now we again finding another angle of O'Casey's approach of feminism. We find that how O'Casey describes the deterioration of the relationship in a society that is war-stricken. Juno and the Paycock by Sean O'Casey is set in the background of the Irish Civil War, we know very well. So throughout the play, we can see the titular character, Juno Boyle and Jack Boyle, relationship deteriorate, and how dramatic events in their lives and the lives of their children, Johnny and Mary, cause the entire family to collapse. So the play is set closely following the singing of the treaty dividing Ireland into sections. It features the resulting conflict between the diehards who want a united, free Ireland and the Free Staters who support the treaty. The conflict represents the clash of fanatical nationalism and practically of idealism and recognition that what the people truly wanted was all peace. So the play explores some of the relevant ideas of the time, including the poverty, religious attitudes and escapism of the working class in Dublin in the 1920s, and how these characteristics affected the communities that lived within the tenements of Dublin at this time. In the first act, we see a great deal of conflict between Juno and Boyle. The root of this conflict primarily lies in Boyle's inability, or I will say unwillingness, to accept responsibility for supporting his family, as he all the time refuses to seek work and spends his days drinking with his manipulative, scrounging friend Joxer. Juno is forced to act as wife, mother, and sole source of income for the family. The prime motivation for the lady is being to keep her raked family united together, is that she knows that she is the only breadwinner of the family and she'll be the only life sustainer, considering and understanding the attitude of her husband. And she says, who has kept home together for the past few years? Only me. So she has a very strong realization of the reality. This introduces us very early on the theme of poverty in the play. The tension in the relationship is directly linked to poverty throughout the play. Boyle's lack of responsibility causing conflict between him and Juno when their financial situation is bad. Your poor wife slaving to keep the bit in your mouth. We can see Ukese present both the positive and negative aspects he perceives in poverty. Here you may find certain aspects being repetitive in nature because these things are overlapping all the time. When we are discussing themes, we are discussing almost similar plot. When we are discussing characters, again we are discussing the same plot. So different aspects keep coming again and again, keep popping up. So you may find them to some extent a little repetitive or overlapping, but that's how things are. Unless we discuss them, we cannot discuss the subject at hand in depth and in detail. We see Boyle contrast the strength and ability that destitution can invoke through the character of Juno. That is one very important and in fact a contrasting effect that will help you understand the significance of both of these characters, who are basically anti-character to each other. There are also a variety of different religions and attitudes expressed throughout the play. One of Ukese's chief mottos in the play seems to show the coexistence of strong religious convictions together with a sincere and human commitment to one's fellow men. Okay, now we are just almost touching the last aspect of the deterioration of relationship that directly relates to the existence of religion in the play. So we have already discussed this aspect when we were discussing themes. However, it is important to bring it again in, because here we are discussing the deterioration of relationships. So there are also a variety of different religions and attitudes expressed throughout the play. One of Ukese's chief mottos in the play seems to show the coexistence of strong religious convictions, together with a sincere and human commitment to one's fellow men. You see that it's all the time a religious conflict between Juno and Boyle. Juno's faith is sincere, authentic, and traditional. However, Boyle's beliefs are just an equal contrast. Then you see that Juno believes on Johnny's death that God can do nothing against stupidity of men, and whatsoever bad happens is because of man's deed. Boyle represents God to be biased and sympathize with human's helplessness. He is found apologetic and indulged in self-sympathy. Then you see that Juno believes that her husband should be praying novenas for a job, and Boyle considers such acts useless and futile. Novena is a recitation of prayers and devotions for a special purpose during 9 consecutive days. Juno believes that Ireland needs is more piety. However, Boyle's Johnny and Bentham portrays unfaithfulness, betrayal to be their services in the time of need. Then Bentham espouses a religion by the name of theosophy. This is projected as vague and abstract and certainly seems to be compatible with his own shallow commitment to people and religion. However, Juno's religious beliefs are apparently we find Mary as supporting Juno's beliefs, however, but her acts convey it all the opposite, matching Bentham's. So it's a kind of religious conflict between all the characters, and whenever two characters are encountering each other, one contrast that they are possessing is contrast and contradictions in their beliefs regarding religion. The writer dramatizes the conflict between the dream world and the world of reality and shows what happens with relationships when a character is stripped of his or her illness, illusions, and forced to face reality. You will see that Boyle is presented as a Paycock who struts throughout the world of the play on a false and imaginary sense of his own self-importance. However, Juno is portrayed as a character of practicality and realism. So, we find that deterioration of relationship is basically not only dealing with the denial within, it also deals with parental conflict, and it deals with several other conflicts that deal with idealism, reality, religion, as well as poverty. You see that Juno's whole life is a lie. His pains, which are invented for the sake of shrinking and avoiding work, become real to him. So he is all the time in denial within. He refuses to face up to the truth and reality about Bentham and the deception surrounding the news of the will. So he is denying and having parental conflicts even with the benefits of his own children. When reality invades and the conclusion of the play in the form of Mary's pregnancy and the actual removal of his material possessions, Boyle is unable to cope and he collapses. So this was all about today's talk, where we had an overview, a general and a specific overview of our second drama that we read in the course of outline, that was Juno and the Paycock, written by Sean O'Casey. Once again, I hope that you must have been clear so far about all of these writings. However, this last overview lecture would definitely help you in clearing any of the misconception or misunderstanding if you had any. I hope that by now you're all ready for your final assessment. In the following lectures, we are going to have an overview of our rest of 2 dramas, and I hope by the end of these 32 lectures, you'll be all ready to set your reflections, clear reflections based on your understanding of modern drama, that is drama 2. That was all for today's talk. I will see you in lecture 31 in the next lecture, inshallah. Allah Hafiz.